"This is a story about him," said the man on the radio. "And you are suspicious, because this was not supposed to happen again."
The klaxon began to wail.
I am not in the hunt. I am free man.
The klaxon began to wail.
My fellow Americans, I'm pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes.
The klaxon began to wail.
Thanks for joining me for another installment of Good Morning Night Vale tonight. This is a story about him. He was an intern at the Night Vale Community Radio Station. He was not tall nor short. He was not fat nor thin. He was average. He was nondescript. He blended into the background of any situation. He worked very hard at being unnoticeable. He learned long ago, or so he liked to tell himself, that he knew the secret to success in Night Vale. The secret was not to get involved. He learned that the new radio host, Robert York, had gotten to be the new radio host at night by simply waiting everyone else out. Now he too was an intern. His family begged him not to go. Nobody volunteers to be an intern, his mother wept. She wailed and pulled her hair, and she gnashed her teeth. His father was stoic and silent. He never expressed any emotions. His father was old. He wanted to be old too. Imitate those that succeed if you want to succeed. This is what his father had told him. His father never did anything. He lived with him all his life, and he still knew nothing about his inscrutable progenitor. "You are our only son," she wept. His mother was always weeping. She never stopped. It was tiresome. Long ago he ceased caring. He learned that love was a weakness. He was their only son because all his brothers and sisters had been taken at some point. Some had been returned, some taken again. All of them had been taken one more time than they had been returned. But not him. He was never taken. He knew why. They only took loved ones. He did not love his parents. He made no effort to be lovable. His father learned far too late this horrible truth, at least as far as his siblings were concerned. He was grateful his father stopped having feelings. How much his father must care to stop loving him. He worried about his mother. He worried his mother might love him, but she did not. She was far too in love with herself. She was in love with being the martyr. She traveled the neighborhood, going to PTA meetings and spending time watching for whales in the sand wastes. Every time she went out into public, she would eventually begin her lamentations. The others would nod. They would look sympathetic. They would say, "Oh, we understand." They would put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. They would tell her how brave she was and to hold on, for things would get better. She didn't want things to get better. She loved complaining about things too much. He hated her for it, which was good. He volunteered to join the Boy Scouts. It was unheard of, but he did. He was exceptionally unexceptional. This was on purpose. He tried very hard to be unnoticeable. Never working too hard, never being too lazy, always straddling that fine line in the middle. He earned his invisibility badge faster than most. It perhaps was the only exceptional thing he'd ever done. And now he was an intern at the young age of 19. A bit young, but not unusual. He was working the night shift, which meant he would meet less people. He knew that the night shift had a far lower intern death rate than the morning show. True, Cecil was a better mentor. Look at what happened to intern Dana. But she was exceptional. He wasn't. He he knew he wasn't. No, he would succeed by simply surviving. He would outlast everyone else, and then he would take his due. He had listened to all the recordings. He'd learned all the rules. He knew all the chants. He knew how to placate management when their ire was raised. He was prepared. He stepped into the lobby. There was a sign behind the front desk. Out to lunch, it read. Carved directly into the counter in shaky script were the following words. Please water the singing cactus. Get really close. You have to get your meaty digits right in there to water them. Drive them into the soil. The cactus loves you. Indeed, the cactus in the corner was singing. It sang a song that promised friendship and understanding. He was immune to such promises. Do not get involved, he thought, as he pressed on into the building. He had finished new hire orientation. He knew what sounds indicated approaching ceiling squids. He knew about the many hazards of the break room. He knew he would not be a statistic. But he did not know how to get to the broadcast booth. He followed the signs down the rows of broadcast booths, disused and covered in layers of dust, yet each booth had a name of a show that he had heard live not less than a week ago. This was to be expected. Not finding Good Morning Night Vale Tonight was not expected. He dodged the ceiling squids, knowing when to grab one of the emergency skateboards and roll yourself across the floor on your belly. He coasted into the intern break room and rolled to his feet. An intern sat slouched in the corner, smoking under a sign exalting the many benefits of good posture. The intern's knees were up to his chin. He rocked back and forth while muttering, I don't want to be transferred. I don't want to be transferred. I don't want to be transferred. Over and over and over. The others ignored the intern on the floor. There, but for the grace of the glow cloud, go I. He ignored the intern too. He went to the center of the room where a pear-shaped person with poor hygiene and a large appetite sat devouring a medium-sized cornbread pizza from Big Rico's. No one makes a slice like Big Rico's. No one. Its shirt had the following legend on it. I'm in shape. Round is a shape. The person of indeterminate gender looked up as it wiped cornbread crumbs on its pants. Its breath smelled of curdled death. Call me Croaker. Don't bother telling me your name. I don't learn anyone's name until you've been here at least a week. Do you need anything from IT? I'm looking for the broadcast booth for Good Morning Night Vale Tonight, he said. The room went deathly silent. It cleared its throat. Oh? So you're working for the vampire. Good luck with that. He narrowed his eyes. Can you help me? It leaned forward and leered. Don't you want to know why they call Rob the vampire? Instead of answering him, he leaned in close. His eyes widened, yet his face grew cold. Its blood chilled as it felt the weight of that unforgiving gaze. The blood drained from its acne-scarred skin. He spoke, softly, in a practiced voice that never failed to intimidate or gain attention. I do not care. This is not some fantasy story. I did not wander into a tavern looking for rumors and a side quest. I want directions. He stabbed a finger into Croaker's abdomen. He felt something squirm. Where do I find the broadcast booth? A soft hand rested on his shoulder, a feminine hand. He turned to face the owner of that hand. It was a rare person who could sneak up on him. She was bright and cheerful, a friendly face in a room full of quiet eyes. "I'm Phil," she said. "You'll be working with me." Her smile was a friendly smile. She looked harmless. She looked like someone whom easily made friends. She was clearly dangerous and not to be trusted. He ignored the handshake and offered no name. Best to keep her off balance, he thought to himself. Easier to establish dominance that way. "Yes," he said, as if he always knew. "So lead the way." He gestured to the exit. She shook her head. "Too many ceiling squids that way. Let's take access shaft B." She walked ahead, prattling and chattering in a sing-song and cheerful voice. No one is this friendly. No one is this nice. No, something is wrong. She is trying to distract me. He pondered as they got near to the service elevator. She pressed the button. He kept an eye on her. Still, as he waited, he started to warm to her. He could not help himself. Why, yes, we could be friends, he contemplated. My first friend ever. That is when he knew his thoughts were not his own. She must be doing something. I must watch her for signs of betrayal. When the doors opened, he pushed her aside and stepped through first. "You take charge. It is not given," his father said. Words he took to heart. He mused these words while watching her out of the corner of his eye. So he thought it odd how quickly she was getting smaller. The look on her face was one of shock. The way she reached for him, her lips pulling back as if to scream. He never heard her scream. He awoke sometime later on the back of a giant, white, furred beast. Its slow, rhythmic breaths were soothing, up until the point when he noticed it wasn't actually breathing. It was just throbbing. He panicked and scrambled, retreating to a far corner of the elevator shaft, his heart in his throat making it impossible for him to speak. Nothing happened. He watched it and slowly walked around the edge of the bottom of the shaft and noticed it had no head. It was huge, mammoth in size, and yet no head, nor neck, nor any evidence of a face or anything anywhere. It had arms and claws and legs and power, and yet it simply lay there, swelling and then shrinking like the rolling tide. He edged to the door and pulled a handle marked Emergency Release. It exposed a tunnel, dark and dimly lit. The tunnel was full of pipes. Pipes of an unnatural sort. Pipes that defied conventional descriptions. The pipes did not do what normal pipes did. They were not straight and orderly with form and purpose. They crawled along every surface save the floor. They grew like vines. They had an organic feel. They were more infestation than infrastructure. They were not right. None of this was right. Each pipe was painted a different color or pattern. Most were unadorned. Some had warning signs. Do not use lit match to check contents. Reclaimed Vimby only. Contents under pressure. Give it a break. Can't this wait until Monday? He was at a three-way intersection with the elevator shaft behind him. The door quietly slid shut. The button flashed out of service. He waited. Nothing happened. No one came to look for him. The only sounds were the shrieks of things moving past him inside the pipes. He rubbed his forehead in a nervous gesture he had picked up from his father, an act he performed to cover his eyes so he would have time to think while hiding his reaction from others. He pulled away a hand, sticky with congealed blood. He suddenly felt a wave of nausea and pain. Standing there was getting him nowhere. Help did not seem to be coming. He would need to rely on himself, something he was used to. This was something familiar. It helped to keep him calm. Depending on others was weakness. He wasn't weak. There was a lull in the movement of substances through the conduits, as if every pipe had picked that exact moment to hold their breaths. He wondered why he thought this, because pipes do not normally breathe. In that pregnant pause, he heard the sound of a man talking. To the left. He started walking. Faster. Faster. It sounded like a man talking on the radio. He must be late, he concluded. Were they already in the middle of the broadcast? I hope allowances could be made. Perhaps I can blame Phil for trying to murder me. Maybe I can get her job. Then he worried, could I betray my only friend? Which was a very strange thought to him, because up until arriving at the station, he had no friends at all. He rounded the corner to see a speaker set high into the wall, nestled among the cancerous pipes. It was playing the current broadcast. The voice that came out of the speaker was describing what he was doing, exactly as he was doing it. He raised his hand. The man on the radio said he raised his hand. He held 3 fingers behind his back. The man on the radio continued, as he did likewise. He knew what was going on. He had been listening the day he heard the story about them, and everyone, of course, knew what happened to you. This was just like that, except it was happening to him. He stared at the speaker in the wall, thinking all of this. The man on the radio noted his thoughts and conclusions. He cleared his mind and emptied his thoughts. The speaker went silent. This is a story about him, the speaker said abruptly, shattering the silence and tearing him from his reverie. He grew angry. His face grew flush with blood as his glands dumped hormones into his circulatory system. His heart started to pound and his mind began to race, and the need to act grew and grew. He had to do something. He needed to do something. He would do something. Fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight. He did not run. He looked about. He saw a broken pipe on the wall, hanging at an odd angle. He grabbed it with both hands. He wrenched it back and forth as the voice on the speaker echoed his actions. That voice pushed him on. It pushed him harder. He pulled the bar free. He rushed to the speaker. He swung again and again and again and again. The speaker sparked and died. He was left in silence, broken only by his own heavy breathing and the occasional screech of something shooting past in the pipes. He could have heard the silence if his ears were not filled with the sound of rushing blood and rushing things. His hands were aching from gripping the rough metal as he wielded it against his oppressor. He took his hand away, and he could see the marks where he grabbed the threaded end too tightly. It occurred to him how stupid what he had done was. He leaned on the length of pipe and thought, what was this? Twice before this had happened. 2 people died. How did they die? When they saw the dark planet. Well, there are no dark planets down here in these tunnels, so he was sure he wasn't going to die. As long as I outlive the broadcast, I will be fine. Others survived. I will survive. It's what I do. What did Phil say as she babbled? The broadcast booth was in a bathroom in the steam tunnels. These looked like steam tunnels. If I could find the booth, I could find the script. If I could read how this ends, I will make a new ending. I survive, he shouted to no one, banging the pipe once on the concrete floor. He laughed and grinned. Hey, at least I'm on the radio. This could be good for my career. Maybe I should take this opportunity to talk about my many virtues. His words echoed out into the tunnels. A low growl replied. That gave him pause. He scanned his environment. He was at a six-way intersection. He had no idea where he came from. He had no frame of reference, no logical conclusions, no solutions presented themselves. He would have to rely on luck. He furrowed his eyebrows as he tried to think of how to maximize the probability of positive outcomes. He heard the growl again, faint, distant. Its origin escaped him. Steam pipes, he said. Trying to convince himself of what caused the growl, he cursed himself for destroying the speaker. Maybe it would have had some advice, or told him what made the sound. Maybe it would tell him he had nothing to worry about. Well, listeners, let me assure you, he has a great deal to worry about. He dragged the pipe across the ground, scratching a faint arrow in a random direction, and headed off in an entirely different way. No sense telling whatever that was what direction dinner was heading, he thought to himself. He gripped the pipe tight. The biting metal ridges were almost reassuring, but not quite. He found a door. He opened that door. He found a dim space beyond that door. A silent projection of a movie was playing along the wall. That was the first thing that caught his eye. The second thing was the 8-foot-tall termite mound sticking out of the metal of the earthen floor. The room was swarmed with termites, but they were all perfectly still. They were enraptured by the drama flickering across the wall. As he watched, he noticed it wasn't an entire movie. It was just clips from a movie. Specifically, a cartoon about an animated talking clock. It was a Disney film, he could remember that much, but the name escaped him at this point. The movie was all about love and relationships, something he avoided at all costs. Dangerous concepts in a dangerous time. The movie clips only displayed the clock. That's when he noticed something odd about the termite mound. It wasn't 8 feet tall. It was only 4 feet tall. The other 4 feet was the queen. A black, bulbous, throbbing abdomen dominated the top of the mound. The head swiveled to face him. Multifaceted eyes analyzed him. Antennae locked onto him. The only sound was the soft plop of egg-laden jelly being forced out in a single spasm. The workers finally took action, swarming to take new arrivals to moist places. A single leg motioned for him to come closer. He could hardly believe the screech he heard next, and he certainly didn't believe it came from his own throat. He slammed the door shut. He fled. He could not, he would not stop. His heart was pounding, his vision blurred. He knew not where his feet were taking him, only that he knew he would let them take him until they could no longer perform the required action. He was leaning against a door, his back pressed against hard metal. He could feel its coolness. His chest was heaving. The metal bar that was once in his hands was now used to be jammed through the handle on that metal door. It was used to make sure that nothing could get in. He would soon learn it also prevented things from getting out. He didn't entirely know how he had got here. He was kind of fuzzy on the details. He blinked, he looked around. The room was full of Etruscan canopic jars. He heard a pounding in his ears. At first he thought that pounding was his own heart. But as the pounding faded, the sound remained. It was sort of like, no, it was exactly like a beating heart. Many beating hearts. He jumped when the man in the room spoke. I asked, "May I help you?" He would have fled out of the door if his metal bar had not kept him inside. As he fumbled to escape, nothing happened. He paused, he turned, he faced the man. The man was dressed in a black suit, wearing a black jackal mask. He sat behind a desk, surrounded by many jars. Each jar had its own rhythmic pulse. Each jar had intention. Yes, I am lost. I need to find the bathroom where the broadcast for Good Morning Night Vale tonight. He left the sentence unfinished, realizing how awkward what he had just said sounded. He was going to discuss the situation and further, but then he thought better of it. The man simply nodded once before he replied, "Ah, you wish to go to the restroom, yes? That's rather simple. As in, not at all. Go down the hallway. No, not literally down, just down. At the first intersection, turn left, then continue, then a hard left, then left again, then right, then hyper right, then down. This time, literally down." Now this next part is a little tricky. If you followed my directions carefully, you will face something. Dealing with it is different for everyone, so I'm afraid I have no advice. But it is what it is. Now somewhere past that, if you successfully deal with it, will be a door. This door says, "Beware of the leopard." There are two such doors. They are both bathrooms. If the one you enter has towels with a recurring theme of a pattern of eyes on them, you're in the wrong one. Oh, and if you reach the moat, you've gone too far, and you will be missed. As a personal favor, if you should happen to see Phil, ask her to get in contact with her brother, Than. He never comes by to visit anymore, and, well, if you could tell her to tell him we should go bowling. The man didn't give him a chance to respond, but instead declared, "That's right, you got it," then stood there, silently. It took a moment for him to wonder when the man had gone from sitting to standing. Motionless. Wondering, listening to the beat. It was at this moment that our protagonist noticed the earbuds in the man's oversized, dog-like ears. Over the sounds of those many hearts, he could barely make out what the man was listening to. It sounded like a radio broadcast. The radio continued its story about him as he retrieved his metal pipe, thus allowing him to leave the room. He followed the directions. He found himself in a place. He started to look for a door, but there really didn't seem to be anything save a maze of twisty little passages, all alike. This was where he was supposed to face something. The lights started going out, or rather, something was consuming light. From behind him came something. Darkness? Something so dark and massive as to appear as darkness? Then something occurred to him. This was a story about him, and he would not die until he saw a dark planet. No monster could kill him. He had nothing to fear. He gripped his bar and marched down the passageway to confront the darkness. He shouted at it. "Don't you know? This is a story about me. It's about me." The darkness chuckled. He stopped. A thought thrashed around inside his head, destroying his bravado. What if it's a story about him? Hot breath washed over him. It turned cool against the sweat that was breaking out all over his body, every pore expelling moisture in a primordial reflex that seemed to serve little purpose in this day and age. Claws clicked on stone. The sound of retreat was heard. Darkness pursued that sound. Light was consumed. Not just light, but everything the light once touched no longer existed. A door. A loud bang echoed as the door was slammed shut. The room he was in was brightly lit. It was staffed by people in blood-splattered business suits. Eyes were black. There were smiles that were not smiles. A set of perfect teeth, with a woman smiling them, stepped up and grasped his hand. Squeezing hard, she pumped it exactly 3 times. Hi, I'm Elena from Streck's Audio Revision Division. You must be the new intern we asked about. We had sent one down quite a while ago and we haven't heard anything yet, so you're the one we asked for, right? He stared at her. He stared at her blood-spattered blouse. He remembered a movie where a man once said, "If someone asks you if you are a god, you say..." He cleared his throat and said with confidence he did not feel, "Yes." What's the problem? Right here, right here. Suddenly he was sitting at a desk. When the tubes come in, mark down what sort of critter is in the tube. Then send it through this tube here. When you have time, tally up the critters by type, size, and color. I require hourly status reports. She smiled wider. Her lips left the confines of her face. So glad you are here. So happy you are here. I hope you are happy here, too. He swallowed. He smiled. He turned to his work. Everyone turned to their work. He glanced at the clock. He only needed to wait until the broadcast was over, he thought. Then I would be safe. He worked. Time passed. He worked. Time passed. He worked. Time passed. He smiled. There was something to this job, something that was a certain je ne sais quoi. It was nice. This was a nice job. A simple job. A safe job. A stable job. A place where no one would notice him. He looked at the clock. It must have been hours. Only 2 minutes had passed? Whenever he looked up, he felt fatigue, ache, need. When he turned back to his work, happy! Time only passed when he looked at that painful clock, and it passed so slowly. He didn't want to look at the clock anymore. Maybe he would just work. Then he heard someone speaking. It was muffled. It was the radio host. The sound was coming down from above, drifting through that drop ceiling that hung over his head like a guillotine. Alina made an unhappy smile. Ugh, I hate that noise. I will have to send them another memo to keep it down. Does anyone have any extra sheets of shale? My printer is empty. What was that? He croaked from lips that had not seen use in days. She turned to him. Oh, some stupid radio. She paused. She looked upward at the voice drifting down from above. She thought it was odd that this voice was describing exactly what she was doing. He rubbed his eyes. He knew if he stayed here, he'd be trapped here forever. He needed to escape. He needed a diversion. Fate, it would seem, chose this moment to intervene. That voice intervened. It declared that for the first time ever in the entire history of the Audio Revision Division, it was time to take a coffee break.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Stand by your easel, paintbrush in hand, and stare into a deep sea of white. The greenhouse is cluttered, there's nowhere to stand, and the colors are dripping, growing to plants, and the windows are fogged with the heat of the moment. So don't hesitate. If you do, you will lose it. And you stare, and you stare, and you stare, and you stare to the beat of the clock that is ticking there. Paint with the blood of the days gone by. Paint with the blood of the days. Stare at your notebook, a page new and crisp, and as blank as a stagnating mind. Your pen is a fairy to grant you one wish, but the words keep repeating, you're better than this, and your head is shaking with unrested eyesight, and you're bending the spine that you used to stay upright, and you care, and you care, and you care, and you care too much to see the words that are written there. Write with the tears of the time you've lost. Write with the tears of the time. Hold your guitar like a promise to keep, and wait for the strings to break. A sweet lullaby, now you're falling asleep, which is not all that different from staying awake, and you're soon woken up by the dream of the moment, but you hesitated. Now you have lost it, and you stare, and you stare, and you stare, and you stare into the past to see what you're missing there. Play with the guilt of a wistful sigh. Play with the guilt of a sigh, and watch your inkwell run dry.
His escape was one fraught with peril and danger. As he ran randomly through the steam tunnels, he remembered something he heard the other week, and as soon as he came across a pipe that sounded like a kitten being pneumatically pumped through one, he knew he had found a landmark. If he followed it, it would bring him to the pulsar facility, and from there he could get out. However, it did not bring him there, or if it did, this was not what one would expect from a pulsar facility. He stumbled out into a tunnel, which turned into a room, which turned into a gigantic room. The walls and ceilings formed a massive dome, or there were no walls or ceilings at all. He found himself tumbling and sliding. He landed near the center. Of all the things that he thought might encounter here, he was not expecting a ballroom, much less a formal dance being held there. In the center of the room was a massive glowing globe that lit everything. The dancers circled the globe. The dance was strange and complex. Everyone knew their part. They wore strange costumes of esoteric eras and bygone ages long past. He found himself swept up into the festivities. At first it was very confusing, but then it became interesting. Eventually it settled somewhere between interesting and fun. Something he didn't encounter a lot. His feet seemed to float along. It was an exhilarating feeling to be part of a crowd. He never liked participating in public affairs. Going out in public and hanging out with others was a good way to get killed in Night Vale. He had never danced before. He decided he liked it. As he spun and twirled, being passed from partner to partner in a fashion he could not entirely understand, he saw Phil across the room. She was beautiful. She was perfect in form and function. She was one of the dancers. Her part was minor, peripheral, but a part nonetheless. She flirted with everyone. Everyone flirted back. She saw him. Her face became marred with grave concern. He remembered the man in the room. He tried to cry out his message to her, but his voice could not be heard over the music which he swore he could not hear until just now. She tried to dance closer to him. He tried standing still until she got closer. However, the dancers just swept him away. Phil's look of grave concern was gone. It was replaced with a look of desperate horror aimed just over his shoulder. He had seen this look before. He followed her eyes and saw it. He saw the darkness. No, it was not darkness. It was void, emptiness, hunger. He tried to escape, but disrupted the dance. He was hurled to the far edge and could not stop himself. He was passing a man dressed in old robes who lingered on the edge of the dance. As he passed, he saw the old man slowly circling the room. Suddenly, he understood. From out here, he could see what the dancers were. They were planets. They were moons. They were astrological bodies playing out the complex interactions of gravity, time, and space. And he was leaving the dance. He was at the edge. He was going to hit the wall. Phil reached for him. She reached from so far away. He reached back. Somehow, he felt his fingertips touch her fingertips. He was beyond. He was beyond the dance. He was beyond the light. He was beyond. He could see nothing. He knew a gnawing hunger was drawing closer. He knew what was above him. He didn't want to look. He knew what was there in the dark. Just up and to the left. He knew. He always knew. He looked up. He saw a dark planet lit by no sun. She had been crying as she beat her fists against his chest, screaming for him to wake up, until she couldn't scream anymore. She was still crying when the paramedics pulled her away. The paramedics could do nothing. Robert York gave intern Phil an awkward pat on the shoulder. There, he said. More formality than comfort. More responsibility than relief. She caught that hand and squeezed it as hard as she squeezed the remaining tears from her eyes. They say he broke his neck. They say he died on impact. These words were hollow and said without being understood, spoken without the desire for understanding. I need to wrap up the show, Robert made as an excuse to leave. Will you be okay? Listeners, she was not going to be okay. Robert York went back to his mic. He sat down. He cleared his throat, and then he spoke. This has been his story. The radio moves on. Secret-coded messages, political opinions, and corrections to political opinions. However, for one night, there was only one story. A story about someone who did not want his story known. And now that story is over. And as always, have a good morning, Night Vale. Good Morning Night Vale Tonight is a total ripoff of Welcome to Night Vale from Commonplace Books. If you drop money off the Empire State Building on them, I'm told they won't mind at all. Music was from Google Free Play, except for stuff I pirated from Disparation. It's okay, their frontman loves to dress up like Captain Jack Sparrow. This episode's coffee break was Dream of the Moment by the Rosielord. I actually got permission this time, so definitely go by and throw some money at her as well. She's really cool. Special note, I wrote this episode in a 2-hour period after waking up out of a fever dream. I'm totally serious on this. This was in my head. You just strolled through it, so I suggest you take up washing with bleach. Now, this is not an official episode of Good Morning Night Vale Tonight. It's actually exclusive content only for the Blood-Spaced Armed Forces Radio Network. Please enjoy. If you have any desire to make your own fan casts, they'd love to hear from you. And as always, the origin of this steaming pile of nightmares is Bob.